The format for this meeting is a 10-minute speaker, our secretary's announcements, a coffee and snack break, and our main speaker. Our first speaker for tonight is Jason. Oh, okay, yeah, I should.
All right, Jason Alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic, but I also like to do heroin. I like to casually smoke crack. I like to casually shoot meth. But I identify with the disease of alcoholism because, it's the overthinking of the mind. I have this, every time I put something in my body, something changes and I can't stop. But to go back a little bit, I grew up in Palos Verdes, so I'm a local. And I was just this scared kid. I was premature and I was in resource classes my whole life growing up. So automatically I felt disconnected. I felt like I wasn't a part of it. I would always get taken from the main class to the separate class. And I always wanted to be a part of it, but I just never knew how to do that because I had so much fear. If I wanted to ask a girl in middle school, I couldn't just go up to her. I had to ask someone to go up to her to ask her and tell her that I like her. That's just to give you an idea of how my brain works. And then today, perfect example of alcoholism. I'm rushing out the door, I'm in traffic, I'm tripping out. Oh my God, what are they gonna think of me? If I'm late, I'm the 10-minute speaker, all this stuff, and I get here and it's 6:45 and the meeting starts at 7:30. I thought it was at 7. But anyways, that fear was there until that first time I was behind a dumpster at the PV Mall. Someone offered me some weed. I was like, sure, why not? That sounds like a good idea. So I smoked it and something happened, something changed. For the first time, I was able to take a breath and breathe. Because naturally, I have a nervous disposition. You can tell, I'm a little nervous, But when I took that first hit of weed, something changed, and that first sip of alcohol, I'll never forget. I was at my house, I had a party, and someone offered me 151. I had no idea what it was. And I just took a pull, thinking it was trying to be cool. I'll never forget that burning sensation, the feeling I got. When I think back, it was like a spiritual experience. It was like, oh, wow. But long story short, I drank through high school, experimented with all types of drugs. And, there weren't any really problems. And I kind of maintained it, stuff like that. I was able to go to college in San Diego. And then that was a problem. Oh, San Diego, I don't like it too much. It's too much drinking, all this stuff. So I was like, you know what? Dad, what do you think about me moving to Santa Cruz? And I was like, and he's like, sure. Why don't you drive up there tomorrow? So I packed my 2 black cats into my car that I rescued, my 5 surfboards, and I drove up there. Got a place, started going to school, and it was on. Forest raves, drinking every night, smoking weed, LSD, all the experimentation possible. And at that time, I didn't, my mom is Jewish. My dad was Buddhist, but was grown up Catholic. So I had no idea what to believe in. So I started listening to Jimi Hendrix. I was like, I'm trying to get experience. I'm trying to feel something. I want to be tap into this spiritual consciousness of the world by experimenting with psychedelics and drugs. And every drug I tried, even if I didn't like it, I continued to do it. I didn't really like drinking, but I still drank. It always made me feel this weird sense in my stomach the next morning, and then, the next day I would be drinking again. But anyways, that progressed and progressed. I was able to go through school, maintain this, this facade that I was all right. My parents were all right, they're in the program. So they're this Al-Anon black belt, my dad is. And they're like, yeah, you're going to do your thing and all this stuff, but we're here for you, We'll help you go through school and stuff like that. And it worked for a while, And the first time I was staying in my house and this guy was staying there and he was like, hey, do you want to smoke some heroin? I was like, sure, why not? That sounds like a great idea. So I tried it and it became a common thing. We called it roasting the chicken. It just has this chickeny smell. We're like, yeah, we're going to get this quarter-piece leg, rotisserie chicken. And it became this routine where call my buddy, be like, hey, let's roast up the chicken. We'd meet up and life was good, my parents were paying for my school. I had 2 cats. I lived in this house in Santa Cruz. I'm going on hikes and, experiencing this college experience. And the wheels started to fall off a little bit. I started to lose friends. I started to lie to them. And, I started to wake up in random places that I don't know how I got there. Riding a bike in the rain, and the next time I wake up and I have like my chin split open. I'm like, oh, whatever. I guess it's just part of the territory. But it progressed and progressed. And long story short, by the end of it, I had a short stint on the streets for 4 years, being homeless, sleeping on cardboard and going to jail all the time. Pretty much lost everything. Was living out of my car, lost the car. And it's actually funny when I think about it. I was just out front of the meeting, and I saw this dude, and he said his name. I'm like, that's so weird. He looks really familiar. So I went up to him. Turns out he was my cellie in Santa Cruz County Jail from 6 years ago. If that's not God working in my life, I don't know what is. We were in there smoking weed, thinking we're all tough, he's trying to do politics in the jail. Like, it's fucking crazy. But no, he just told me he's freaking in aerospace, and like I live a great life. But anyways, it got to a very rough point to kind of back up, and I had like warrants out for my arrest. I had this really nice tent up in the mountains with an ocean view. I would go up there and cook on my little stove with hand sanitizer and make mac and cheese, and life was good. That was like the new normal for me. Was like stealing, going to jail, get out, have a new camp spot, and like it was kind of fun. I felt free, but not. I wasn't free. I was just, in pretty much autopilot. And, my parents were always calling me, and I'll never forget this story. There was a gnarly storm, and I'm in my tent, and it just poured rain for like 3 days straight. Tent ripped a hole. I'm like floating in water. I wake up like 18 hours later. I'm floating in water in my tent, just soaked. It's like 39 degrees outside. My dad calls me. He's like, what's up, buddy? I was just thinking about you. And I'm like, he's like, how you doing? I'm like, I'm doing really good. I'm doing great. And I just, I just was deluded to the fact that like, fuck, I was a piece of shit. It was just like a literal burnt out muskrat, just cruising the streets of Santa Cruz. But anyways, the day came where, something happened, I choose to call it God, but something happened in my life where I'm walking on the street. I had these like two roads I can go. It's like, all right, like I can run or I can just ride it out. Anyways, the cops stopped me and I went to jail, and I was facing time, but I chose a program. And I got sent down to a program that a lot of people know, New Life or Miracle House, whatever you want to call it. And I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. I had no tools for living. I didn't know how to pay a bill. I always called my mom for that. I didn't even know how to like make a bed when I got sober. I was just so conditioned to just like living a life of just debauchery and not showering for months at a time. And I got a sponsor and started working the steps. And it was really tough at first. Like, it was brutal. I was losing teeth. I was at the dentist's office all the time in the beginning. It was, ibuprofen, all that stuff. And, something changed inside of me with going through the steps. I got this, like, sense of a purpose, a sense of living, 2 minutes. I was able to see that, like, maybe my life can go somewhere. And I know how I was going to get there. I had no idea. I was so scared of the unknown, but I just put one foot in front of the other. I did the steps. I helped dudes in the house. I went to meetings, and, my life has blossomed into something beautiful. I work in property management. I was literally sleeping on cardboard 4 years ago. I took 4 years April 10th. And, I have a relationship with my family that they're both sober, and we laugh about all the times that, all the just debauchery that I did in their house and stuff growing up. And, I get to take guys through the steps and be like, yeah, I know how you feel. Like, I was there. And it's such a fulfilling feeling. Like, that's like my spiritual juice. That's my spiritual drink, whatever you want to call it. That's what gets me going. There's never a greater feeling when you meet with the sponsee and you get in the car and I'm driving on the freeway and I'm literally singing Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper. You know what I mean? With no shame, like with someone next to me. And probably the biggest thing is like I'm content with myself today. Some days I may not love myself, but other days I look in the mirror, I'm like, damn, you're pretty sexy, like that was never the thing before. I was always like, I fucking hate you, like I'm stuck with you today. And that's why I use drugs. That overthinking of my mind, that chatter that tells me I'm not good enough, the chatter that tells me you're not going to amount to anything. And really, like, I'm fucking perfect the way I am. And I've done a lot in my sobriety. I've traveled. I've experienced new places sober. I went to Mexico. I went to Nicaragua. Just like, from going from being homeless to doing stuff like that and showing up for my parents. It's such a beautiful gift. And my life has really blossomed. I have a bunch of debt that I'm paying off. Unfortunately, I don't want to do it, but, I'm making those calls. And I'm a functioning member of society now. And my life has just completely changed. And I'm stoked on what the future holds. So thank you guys for letting me speak.
Okay. Now, our main speaker will share his experience, strength, and hope with us. Please join me in welcoming Josh from Lawndale.
Mute yourself. What's up, guys? Josh Alcoholic. Nice to be here. In American Martyrs, I used to come here all the time when I was new, and I was in a recovery house. I was 18 years old. I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous and never thought I was going to stay. I just took 19 years July 1st. And please. And I just never thought I was going to be here. If you're new, and sorry for the short break, I know the breaks are like what kept me together when I was new in AA. My very first meeting, it was up at like Chinatown, up in Hollywood, the Hollywood area, and I was surrounded by nice-looking people, man. It was just white teeth and breast augmentations and nice cars, and I hadn't done my laundry in 90 days, and I had long black hair and 4 facial piercings that they made me take out to go into my sober living, and upside-down cross carved into my arm and a pentagram carved into my chest and a bunch of cigarette burns on my forearms, looking at people like I wanted to eat them. And I just never thought that I was going to last in AA. And there was a kid at the break, and he looked at me and he's like, man, this AA is garbage, huh? And I'm like, yeah, dude, AA sucks. And we just talked about how bad AA was for the whole break. And at the very end of the meeting, he's like, see you next week. I'm like, yeah, man, see you next week. So I never thought I was going to stay here. And great job, Jason. Love you, buddy. You did really good. Very proud of you. Man, I never thought in 1,000 years there would be men in my life who that would express love. That was weird for me. A lot of us probably grew up in an alcoholic household or had some turbulence. Some of us are from great families. There's just really no rhyme or reason as to why we have what it is we have. You talk to everyone, and they're all a little different than me, or some of them are similar. Myself, I come from a long line, threaded stock, alcoholics, My family hails from East Kentucky in Harlan County. My great-grandfather was a coal miner for 45 years, and my grandfather was a drunk. My dad was a drunk. My uncle was a drunk, And my grandpa and I have the same sobriety day, July 1st. He's sober like 39 years, and I'm sober 19. My uncle, and he's not sober in AA. He went to rehab, and then he went to church. He works for non-profs. He just turned 90 years old. And 2 years ago, I went to go speak up, or 3 years ago, I went to go speak up at one of the big meetings in Washington State. They fly a speaker out once a month. There's like 500 people, lots of chairs. My grandpa showed up early, 88 years old, and they were like, we don't know who this old guy is. He'd help stack all those chairs. And he's not in AA, huh? But I used to think, because I was in AA, I had a leg up on some other people who got sober elsewhere. My uncle, same story. My uncle is sober 31 years. And he lives up in Mammoth, in that area. Crowley Bishop, and he knows everyone. He runs a big company in Mammoth. He just knows everyone. And I went to go speak up there in the Alano Club. And when they found out who my uncle was, who I low-key judged, for not being in AA and just kind of drinking in O'Doul's every once in a while, and I'm like, I don't know what kind of quality of life you're living, buddy, but it isn't mine, spiritually free. And when they found out, they were like, if you ever need anything, at my darkest time, your uncle was there for me. Like 4 people came up to me at that AA house because my uncle had just gone out on a limb for them, helped them out, put them up somewhere when they were drying out. And I just don't know anything. I think that's really I only have half the picture. I think most of us do. I think what we suffer from is confusion. We're all very confused about what's actually important. I come up here and I put on this suit, and I feel like a fraud immediately, but then I realize that the other persona I walk around with in boots and, jeans and T-shirt and a grimace, that's also a lie. And everything else I've ever tried out is also only relatively true, right? I'm kind of this product of a turbulent childhood and emotional immaturity and issues with authority and trust. And if you were to change a couple of little ingredients in my life, I would, God bless you. Benji, if you could mute yourself, we'd love you. Thanks, brother. But I might be different than I am, right? I'll tell you, my dad was, he got discharged from the Navy for, under questionable circumstances for being an entrepreneur on the aircraft carrier and selling a little Peruvian marching powder. And he was a naval medic, so he got into med school, and as he was doing it, and he didn't believe in himself, and he eventually sabotaged that and got caught stealing morphine. And he would get drunk and cruel with my mom, very insecure, because a lot of us don't believe in ourselves, huh? We don't have any concept of self-love or self-worth. We don't know how to, and we make decisions based on that all day long without even realizing that's what we're doing. We choose people and situations that'll prove to us we're not worth anything, subconsciously. Huh? I remember I was doing a 4-step, and this is going to be just like all over the place, so deal with it. Live in acceptance for the next 25 minutes or 35 minutes. I was out writing an inventory, and at this time in my life, when I was 10 years sober, I had a long-term relationship. I did some big boy stuff. She had a daughter. That terrified me. I thought I was going to hit the kid because I was hit. I grew up getting the crap kicked out of me. My childhood could be summed up with Jesus and violence. That was it. And my stepdad was the son of a gunsmith from Billings, Montana, barrel chest, mustache. He's so country, his middle name was Buster. And his dad was Butch. And he just beat the piss out of us and dragged us to church 4 times a week. So during the developmental years of my life, and that was the sad story I told myself. Like, I would get crap kicked out of me. I had like 8 concussions by the time I was 8 years old, So that's so sad, right? Can't feel sorry for me. This is why I am this way. Can't you see? But all of that stuff that helped formulate who I thought I was, I did some big boy stuff in that relationship. And right around 10 years sober, she told me the same thing my other girl. I had a belly dancer girlfriend for a while in AA, and that was all a lot of fun. Some of you have known me for a while, probably remember that. But then the belly dancer left with a sword juggler, and that's not a joke. She left me for a sword juggler. And so while this other one was getting ready to leave me, she told me why she was leaving. And what happened is her face changed into someone else, the other girl's face. And I realized that it was me. It wasn't them. And that, furthermore, I would continue to recreate the same karmic loop in my life over and over again unless I addressed some serious, fundamental things about the way I interacted with other people. It was me. We get to build our own prizes here, But sometimes, especially with me and being an alcoholic and having all the stuff that it comes with the territory, like Jason was talking about, I had no way to really address any of these deeper things that I was carrying around without even realizing they were stowaways. And so I was doing this 4-step, brings me to this thing, and I was writing down all my fears. And I started to think to myself, And it was just kind of an aha. And I came to find later that other people have addressed the fear inventory in AA this way, but I never had, and it was just intuitive at that time. I replaced the word fear with believe. Not that I'm afraid of love. That's a belief. I believe I'm not worthy of love, right? I'm not afraid of success. It's I believe I'll never be successful, right? These are secret beliefs I carry in me like an iceberg right beneath the surface. And so I changed every fear I had into a belief that I was probably secretly carrying around in my heart. And when I looked at that, I realized what kind of decisions does someone who believes those things make? What kind of life do I live? What kind of job will I have? What kind of career path will I choose? What kind of partner will I find? Well, oftentimes I found myself finding the partner that was going to prove to myself that I wasn't worthy of love. I find someone who treats me the way I secretly believe about myself. And so I changed it, and I thought to myself, okay, all right, this is weird, and this isn't in the book. This isn't in the black part, But I'll tell you what, the world is full of gray. I am so much less black and white. I am pretty sure convinced that today it is it's all gray. It's all relatively true. I'm not even sure I exist. So I thought to myself, all right, so let's say like I didn't get beat as a kid. Let's say that like when my father came back into my life and I started spending time with him again, and then he died suddenly of alcoholism when I was 10 years old. And then I started running away from home, smoking cigarettes, lighting stuff on fire, getting in trouble, getting in fights, being violent. My mom took all the knives out of the house. She came home. Remember Heaven's Gate, the cult? When that happened, I was so fascinated by it. I was like 10 years old that I cut out all the stuff from the Daily Breeze and everything else, and I put it up on a poster board, and I put it up on my wall in my room. And my mom was like, what is wrong with my child? God help me. And I'd been in therapy since I was 4 years old because they didn't know for 4 years that all that stuff was going on at home. I just acted out at school, But if any of those things wouldn't have happened, it would have been a little bit different. When I was 12, my mom had had enough, and she couldn't take me anymore. And I was such a bad kid to raise, guys. I was just bad. But that's all I knew. I don't beat myself up for it, but Jesus, I hope I never have a kid like me. And if I do, I'm going to learn unearthly patience. And she told me my grandpa was having a heart attack when I was 12 and picked me up from where I'd run away to, and we went to go visit my grandpa in the hospital, and we got into the lobby, and it was a very uncrowded hospital. And we walked through the back door, and they shut it and slid the deadbolt shut, and I was in a mental institution. And so I spent 6 months in a mental institution when I was 12, and that's where they diagnosed me with all sorts of stuff. I started getting on heavy. When I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was on 8 different medications, and had been for a decade. Anti-anxiety, antipsychotics, anti-anxiolytics, tranquilizers, mood stabilizers, sleep meds, all of it. I had a rap sheet. I had 3 psychiatric evaluations. I was easily headed for dire straits as an adult. And I had a problem with authority. God, you tell me what to do? How dare you? I don't care if you're my boss, or you've paid me. Like, I just have this thing. I was at it, even still to this day, it haunts me. Rebellion dogs my every step. I was asked to speak at a PG meeting, and it was right after COVID, and I thought I could get away with a bolo tie. I didn't even have a bolo tie, right? But I decided I was going to go buy one just to be an asshole. And so I go and I buy this bolo tie at Boot Barn, and I go up there with my bolo tie, and I have no jacket. And I forgot about the jacket. It had been so long I was out of practice because COVID had struck. And they made me get a jacket, and I didn't want to get the jacket, but they made me put one on, and at the end of that, my brain said them, and I realized as I was speaking, it's me. It's always me. One of the spiritual axioms, I feel you, honey, I am hot as hell, right? It's hotter than 40 hells in here right now. Especially with my 3 layers. I feel like an Inuit, hunting blubber in a subsistent lifestyle. But let me get back to what I was, my point, that I felt like all that stuff, if you changed a little bit of it, sitting there doing that 4-step and that fear inventory, that I might be different. If my father was still alive, would I be the same guy? if I had never been dropped off at a mental institution and abandoned for pretty much 12 months, would I be the same guy? You know, if I'd never been put on medication or sent to my first therapist, would I be the same guy? And the answer I kept coming to is no, of course not. I would be someone different. And what came on the heels of that is that maybe my personality is fragile. Maybe everything I get in arguments over, everything I fight for to the death, everything I try to get onto Facebook to try to correct your thinking about is only relatively true. And so if everyone is essentially at the base in a similar trap, the net of ego and identity, if who they think they are is kind of illusory and it's all BS, then why don't I create some new BS? Why don't I create and decide to see the world in a way that will both benefit me and my fellow traveler? So I wrote new beliefs down. Next to the fear inventory where I have the secret beliefs, I wrote new ones. It's not that I'm afraid I'm not worthy of love, is I am love and am loved and can love, right? And I did that. It sounded like a woke Instagram post at the end of this thing. Like I could just put it on there with like a picture of a sunset, you know? But I started to live that way. I started to try to pretend that that was real. And amazing things happen in my life. I'll tell you another thing that they'll not talk about in AA, but this is my experience. First of all, I got sent to that recovery house, the same place, New Life House, way back in the day. Back then, it was not as easy as it is now. Just kidding, guys. And but back in the day, they took a lot lower bottoms, right? There was no insurance involved anywhere. There was no IOPs. There was roaches every year. You can go out into the kitchen, and you'd see it moving at night, right? And we get rats we had to kill every year. And some of the times they get caught in the walls. And so if you had to walk by bathroom number 3, it would just, you just smell it, you know? And but that place, something changed in me, and I took a year sober. Somehow, out of the blue, I was a year sober. I didn't want to hit the streets. I was from San Diego at that time, and I didn't want to come down to L.A. and be homeless. I didn't have the balls, you know? I was afraid. And so I stuck around and just was mean to everyone in AA. And I remember getting here and thinking to myself, my God, I have never seen a complete lack of insight. I've never seen such a demonstration of groupthink. I've never seen so many emotionally damaged and broken people coddling themselves over their petty achievements in the world while the universe hurtles toward the abyss and void of nothing because nothing matters and all of you are, right? And it was just like that. That's how I was when I was new. I was like, they'd be like, hey, Josh, how you doing? Hey, keep coming back. I'm like, you don't give a shit about me. Don't pretend to give a shit. You don't care about me, man. You're just doing that because it keeps you sober. I'm on to you. And so I was just bad to deal with all the time, man. And people loved me. The love of Alcoholics Anonymous got past my intellect. And I know I'm a smart guy. Saying that I'm not a smart guy is false humility. I have skills, and I also have blind spots. I have skills, and I have shortcomings. Humility is understanding the true measure of who I am, right? And if I want to be a professional, if I want to go out and apply some of this stuff we learn in Alcoholics Anonymous to my day-to-day life, there has to be some sort of confidence developed. Playing the humble servant every single day of the week is not always the role that God assigns. Sometimes I have to be the boss or the entrepreneur or the decision maker or the speaker, tonight blowing the hot wind at the microphones. But ultimately, it's not real. You know, it's really not real. God, I wish it were. And sometimes it feels that way, but it isn't. I guess the truth that could be said about my experience with the 12 steps is I have been cracked open. I'm a different human being than I was. I remember when I was 21 years old, I stopped taking those medications. I haven't been on meds since I was 21. My consciousness shifted. And I don't recommend anyone does that. I don't have an opinion on that. Do not do it. When I'm working with a guy who's duly diagnosed, I say, you got a psychiatrist? And if he doesn't, I don't work with him. Or I try to get him help till he can talk to a doctor. Because people around here die. They die because they want to fit into AA and they feel like they're not spiritual unless they do. Because some old-timer who they respect because they didn't have a good father, they didn't have a relationship with a male, someone they're looking up to in the case of being a man, you know, like they want that guy's love more than anything. And so in order to fit in, they will do something that ends up, I've watched people die because they commit suicide or they decide to go out one more time because they're off their meds and they're not thinking clearly. So I don't think we should have an opinion on that in AA. And if you're on medication, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. It'll all come out in the wash. You may need it for the rest of your life, and that doesn't matter. You'll be able to help people where you're at. And that's the best part about AA, is we can help people where we're at. You know, I remember right after that girl left me and all that stuff happened, I was 10 years sober, I decided that the only thing that was probably going to make me feel better was sleeping with everyone. And and I was sponsoring guys, and I was doing the work, you know, and I was speaking at AA meetings all over the place, and I was on Tinder, and I was on Bumble, you know, and I would pay for the advanced one so I could better my chances. And I'd have a date on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I was in the best shape of my life, you know? But I couldn't stop, you know? It was really addicting. I couldn't stop, and it was fun. And I tried. Bill's my sponsor, Bill Cleveland, and he's like, Josh, you think you want to, you know, slow down on this stuff? And I said, yeah, you're right, Bill. I'll stop. And that night, there I am. You know, it's just like drinking. And that's an interesting point to make, because I believe that self manifested in various forms is the nature of alcoholism. Self is what defeats us, huh? So it's the reason that self manifested in various forms. It's the reason we get sober and all of a sudden we like gambling, or we eat a little too much, or we're doing something else that gives us the dopamine, because the ego, once it's seen, comes up to the second floor. It's like a game of cops and robbers. Cops enter into the floor of alcoholism, ego comes up into spiritual righteousness. You know? Then finally the ego comes up into spiritual righteousness, he comes up into sex addiction, or whatever it is, because self is constantly manifesting in various forms, and that's what the nature of alcoholism is. And the interesting thing about that, how many people here have heard the concept of the God-shaped hole? We got a God-shaped hole, right? And I understand what we're illustrating. It's a beautiful sentiment. It means we need a power greater than ourselves to help us have a psychic change, right? Psychic meaning discorporeal, not of the body, right? It means the essence of a thing, not the physical thing itself. We need that, whatever it is in us that drives us, we need an emotional rearrangement on the level to produce a complete shift of perspective. And I have had that as a result of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was the last one to know it. I had the spiritual experience of the educational variety that it talks about in our appendix. And but for a time, I didn't know I'd had it. And what I had was a spiritual ego, right? But that God-shaped hole that I thought I had, I realize now that there is no hole. The hole is in the mind, which is why nothing ever fills it, because it's an illusion. And that's why we find ourselves jumping from one thing to the next thing to the next thing to the next thing interminably, suffering all the while. Huh? Suffering is a great gift if you use it to accelerate your evolution. Oh, thank you, darling. I'm a little hot. I'll put this right here. Thank you, brother. Just throw it on the chair. No one recognizes my authority in my life, you know. I got this suit. I ordered this suit. I've never had a tailored suit. And then the pants were a little bit too big. So I took it in and I had them measure it all off. And, you know, and I felt pretty good about it. You know, they're giving me refreshments. This is a nice little suit shop. And I'm feeling like I've made it. And so they take it and then they're like, we'll have it for you next Monday. And I go there and they're like, oh, it's not ready yet. I'm so sorry. We're slammed right now. But I come back next month. And I come back next month. They finally give it to me and I pull it out and I put it on at home right before this meeting. And they didn't even alter it at all. So I'm like swimming in my pants. They didn't open up the chest. And what does it matter? You know, what does it matter? So maybe it'll be a good suit for them to bury me in, you know, before the gases swell me up. But I think about that. I think about dying. I think about my death. I know that I'm only temporarily here in this fixed form, only for a small time. And in the West, we hide from death. God, when someone's sick, we don't even know what to say. We say, I'm so sorry. When their vehicle's done, we don't say that when we drop off our car at the dealership, you know, and say, trade it in, get me a new one. You know, we don't say that. We don't say, I'm so sorry to the mechanic as we're dropping off the vehicle that no longer runs, you know. But there's been a couple of people who've been dying, and I've gotten to sit with them, my family members, and I've gotten to observe and I've been so sick before. I remember one time I had 104.2 temperature. I was hallucinating. I had a massive infection in the front of my face, and I was in so much physical pain. I had to sleep sitting up for 6 days, and there was so much pressure and so much pain. I was reduced to an animal, and I thought to myself, I think this is what getting sick must be like. When your body just turns against you and you can't, and all you want is to go to sleep. And I don't think, and the relief of death, it's a relief, sometimes when the body's no longer wanting to be here. And I'm a weirdo, man. I'm a weirdo in the sense that I believe, I'm a scientific guy too, believe it or not. I really like logic, Aristotelian logic. I really like something is either true or something is false, right? But there's also an Eastern form of logic where something is both true and false, or something is neither true nor false. And I think a lot of the world, as I've stayed sober longer, has become those latter forms, is that it's not always so cut and dry. It's not always so black and white. And I'm grateful that the men in Alcoholics Anonymous spent time loving me so that I could try to practice that love with other people. Because that is what we are doing here. What we are doing here is trying to walk each other home, as Ram Dass would say. We're all just walking each other home. Like the war is over, you lost, and it's all right. Whatever you think you need to fix you, the train is not leaving the station. I'm a weirdo in the sense that I believe that if something is supposed to happen, there is nothing I can do to make it stop. And that if something is not supposed to happen, there is nothing I can do to make it work. And I live trusting the world that way, and there has been a revolutionary difference in the way that I'm able to interact with my life. And I forget all the time. I just wrote inventory a couple days ago, What's really crazy is, I'll tell you, when I was about 3 years sober, 2 years sober, I left that house on bad terms. I told management to go F themselves. And I waged forward into Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the things that I had done while I was in an all-male sober living home that was highly structured is I'd made tons of friends in AA. A lot of you people who are in a program, if you're just hanging out with people from your program every time you come to the meeting, you're not building relationships in AA, I'm telling you, that was the bridge that led me through a cataclysm with my treatment program. Is I had relationships here, and I hung out with people, and I was going out to coffee, and we were playing pinochle until 2 a.m., doing all the young people stuff, getting naked at conventions and running around streaking, just being crazy and staying sober. And then after a time realizing, man, I'm doing all this for attention because I desperately want love, and I'm highly insecure, and I'm just like a little child inside, and I don't know how to be a man. I don't know how to look hard things in the eye without trying to fight them or run from them. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to be intimate with a woman. I don't know how to do anything but have sex. But I don't know how to open my heart to someone, right? And these are all things we don't always talk about in AA. They're kind of hot topics, but they're so critical because a lot of people drink over this stuff. This is the stuff that pulls people out. It's never the bobcats that ruin the picnic. It's the ants. And so I think it's important to be able to talk about that. While I was going through that massive period in my life of all the dating and sex, and I was still sponsoring guys, and I was being honest about it. And if you're new, when we ask you to be honest, we're not asking you to act honest. We're not even asking you to live honest. We're just asking you to be honest about what you're actually doing. And I was honest about what I was actually doing. And I was still showed up, and I was honest with the guys I sponsored. And sometimes the stories were fun. It wasn't like this was a bad thing. It was just quite hedonistic. And at the end of it, I realized the only thing that I've accomplished in my life for the past 3 years is having sex with people and speaking in AA meetings. This is not great. This is I can't put this on a resume. Unless I'm getting into an industry that I'd rather not mention at the podium, but artfully infer to. So I realized at that time I'd been making a lot of money right around the time that relationship ended at 10 years sober. And I was in real estate and I was flipping houses and that's what my family does. And I had a day job and I was wheeling fat checks in and out of a till, while the banker looked on with amused skepticism. And I felt like I had arrived. And then I lost everything at 10 years sober. All my projects, I lost like a lot of money, a lot of six figures, not seven, thank God. And the relationship, and the relationship walked out of my life 2 weeks before that. And I was 10 years sober, on the brink of bankruptcy, with no relationship. The two defining features of the Western man, my money and my relationship, are gone. And I survived, man. My sponsees showed up for me. I just sat there watching YouTube conspiracy theories for like a week, thinking, man, the Anunnaki were just wild. And it was crazy, man. It's been such a wild ride. And I want to talk a little bit about what happened recently. But before that, when I left that house on bad terms, I fell in with a group of people that were really working the steps. And we were really working the steps. I was working with wet drunks. We had couch commitments. We'd give them orange juice and honey when they were DTing in the Alano Club parking lot. We'd put them up on the couch. We'd read the book at them. I was healing these guys. I'd press Bill Wilson's crest on their forehead and watch them hiss, Like, that's what it was like. And I got a spiritual ego. I had the answer. We were reading the big book, the 12 and 12, the service manual, going back through it. We're always cycling through the story. Oh, you ever read that story? Well, like it says on page, And it was intense. I sponsored guys mean. I was mean. You're full of shit, Get over here. Quit talking to her. Get in the meeting, And I remember walking little 17-year-old Curtis to the liquor store, holding him by the scruff of his neck and telling him, what are you drinking? I'm buying your drink. And he's like, I don't want to drink, And I'm like, sure you do, Curtis. Look at the way you're living. And I had to make amends to all these people I sponsored. Later, when I realized what I was doing was crazy, but I had no idea. And I left that group of people because I didn't feel love. It was all ego. For me, it was all ego. It was all posturing. I felt like a broken senatorial family that had just gotten done threatening each other's lives before stepping out on stage and going like this, I felt like that's how my spiritual life was. And I left that sponsor, and I was in a dark place because I'd alienated and judged everyone else in Alcoholics Anonymous. You guys are all a bunch of fornicators and energy drinkers and gamblers, While I'm sitting here with the holy white light. And I didn't want to go back. And I called Bill Cleveland, who'd been shadow sponsoring me and kind of keeping me right-sized and on the path as I'm sitting here I'm like, I have an army of sponsees. We could take the Alano Club at any moment, Their defenses are weak. And Bill cautioned me, and I was crying, man. There was this time, and I was 4 years sober. My girlfriend had started drinking. I was in a codependent relationship. I was visiting Al-Anon. I was getting judged for it. I didn't have any friends. Felt like I was better than everyone. I either had people that were better than me or worse than me. But I had a ton of sponsees, and I was absolutely spiritually empty. And I felt so bad. And I called Bill, crying, and he said, come over to my house. And it was Wednesday night, and I came over to his house. It was 10:30 at night. We'd just gotten done with the Burt Street meeting. And I realized I'm going to have to leave this sponsee family, the sponsorship family that has been the only true north I've known. And I went, and I was waiting for Bill to tell me what page to turn to. Or I was waiting for him to ask me a question about what I was not doing in my life. I was waiting for him to examine me with an air of judgment or condescension, like every other male in a position of authority did for my entire life, including the recovery house I got sober at. But what Bill did is he looked at me, and I can still remember how kind his eyes were. I don't know if you've ever heard Ram Dass speak or seen him speak ever on one of his videos, but his eyes, he has the kindest eyes. Bill's eyes were glowing like that, and he looked at me and he said, you're okay, buddy. He's like, Josh, you're okay. You're okay the way you are. You're okay. And he just kept crooning that to me. Well, I'm sitting here at the lowest point of my life. I'm waiting for this guy to tell me why I'm broken, and he loves me instead, And that entered my heart in a way that my mind and my intellect and all these defenses I'd built up could not defend against. And He changed me, man. Bill Cleveland saved my life. Bill Cleveland made me a more loving human being. And he won't say that. We know he's the vessel, he's the conduit. Bill Cleveland's an illusion too, but a damn good one who's really helped me a lot. And he's like my dad, You get new dads in Alcoholics Anonymous. If you didn't have one you liked, you get a new one. You get moms, you get weird-ass uncles who hug people too long. You just get it all. And when COVID, I got 7 minutes. When COVID hit, okay, I'd lost all that money and I was just sleeping around and, being funny or whatever. And I decided that I was ready for the next step of what the universe was. I was like, all right, God, I'm ready. I'm ready to get back in there. I got my helmet on. I'm ready to jump back in the trench. I don't know what I want to do, but I'm ready. And so what I did is I started looking at some of the things in my life for the next, first of all, it was all about addition. I thought I was broken the first part of AA, first 5 years, right? That I didn't have the pieces, that there was a God-shaped hole, that I wasn't fixable. And so AA was the only thing that was going to give me Band-Aids and tape and spitballs one day at a time so that my ass didn't fall off and I didn't descend into madness. And that's kind of the way I live my life. And after that experience with Bill, I started realizing that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 steps are subtractive. They are not additive. It is spirituality through reduction. It is about paring away and pulling away falsehood, things that are no longer true, things that maybe used to be true. For instance, when we're out there drinking and using, we have to lie, cheat, and steal. It's the only way to survive being an alcoholic. But you come here and it starts to get in the way because this is a different environment. The host cannot survive in here continuing to lie, cheat, and steal because our community is one of the many things that heals us. And we separate ourselves when we lie and we cheat and we steal with each other, But it became subtractive. And then around that time, I was realizing, all right, shit, it's not all subtraction. It's not all addition. It's all gray. It's all, what do I do? How do I live in both places? How can I be a human and understand that I'm a spiritual being and that I'm sitting here? How did I even get trapped in this body? How did it even happen? And I see you, how'd you get here? How'd you get here? I didn't get thrown into the earth. I grew from it. And here I am. And here you are. And what are we doing with it? And I started to realize that for many years I used powerlessness as a way to disempower me from ever doing anything or risking anything or trying anything. I didn't want to do anything. I didn't know what to do. And so I started thinking, if I've accessed power through this power greater than myself, then anything I choose to do today is I either build or I destroy with God. I'm either building stuff up, trying, experimenting, whatever I do, I'm doing with the light of consciousness that's been offered to me through the experience of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I started thinking, what if I could aim a little higher? I'm not a guy who believes I'm not worthy of love anymore. I'm not a guy who believes I'm not worthy of success. I'm ready, universe. So I started taking a look at some of the things I did as a man that weren't great. Sleeping with everyone and using every single woman you meet as a transactional item to release dopamine, is probably not a good idea, as far as spiritual development goes. Being a constant womanizer is not going to be a great thing as far as trying to be a good role model for the men in my life. So I slowly started changing a couple of things. And when COVID hit, I got let go of my job I'd had for 15 years. I got put on furlough. And during that time, I had started a company. I'd done all this stuff on the side. But I got given an assignment. And this spiritual assignment was my uncle asked me to write a constitution for my life. He said, look, the Constitution saved America from everyone who tried to destroy it. What do you think it could do for one life if you wrote it? So I was like, what? It's so hokey. But I wrote it. What do I actually want in my life? What do I want to stand for? What's important to me in my family and money, business, passions? What do I want? If I could just make it, if all this stuff is fabricated, if my limitations are only set on me by my society, by my parents, by my misfortunes, then what if I could just write it all tomorrow? What would it look like? And I wrote it all down. And I'm telling you that 2.5 years since I wrote that thing, we just did the paperwork. The company I've worked at for 15 years, I'm now going to be a partner and owner. I sold the company that I had started to a profit to myself. I completely transformed. I went from living with roommates to having my own place to having a relationship, deciding to commit to a girl who I'd met through a gift of Alcoholics Anonymous. She's not in the program, but I was leading a men's retreat in North Dakota, and she was on the flight coming home. You know, the guy who was addicted to internet dating meets his girlfriend in an airport. The universe is so compassionate and so bountiful. I mean, so many things have changed in my life, and there's some great material successes, you know, but I'm making more money than I've ever made in my life, and it is not satisfactory at all. It does not. It just solves a couple of problems, right? I don't have to worry about what I'm going to eat when I go to dinner. But besides that, what I found is that it's a tool of love and service. I can cover the bill when I'm out with new guys. It's a tool I can help my mom out who is on a fixed income and she doesn't have to worry anymore. You know, like I can, and I want to do great things with it and I want to do fun stuff too, but it all is allowed to be here is what I'm saying. There is no limitation. The only limitation that there seems to be is those that I place upon myself. And so I'm trying to live in this world now that I can help shape and that I can help breathe life into and that I could choose each day to be the light or the darkness, and I choose both. But one of the things that really screwed me up, that might be screwing you up now, is I used to listen to people talk and they'd have honeyed words and they'd be good at turning a phrase. And I'd think when I heard these old timers share that they had done the steps so that selfishness didn't exist anymore. And so I went and worked the steps harder. And I did the Stepford's Men's Group, Dr. Paul's work booklet, men's book studies, doing all this stuff, just getting into another inventory, another 10-step. I'm constantly reviewing myself. I really know how I work. I turned AA into a self-centered pursuit somehow. And what I found is that the rascal never dies. There is Alan Watts calls it the irreducible element of rascality. It'll never go away. It's what makes being a human so goddamn fun. And so I realized that selfishness isn't going anywhere. I've made room for it at the table, right? There's an old Buddhist adage that if you want a happy horse, give it a large field. And I have learned to give myself a large field. And as a result, the most amazing thing has happened is I have given you all a much larger field. And in learning how to love all the ugly, jagged pieces of myself that society says I should go to therapy to get rid of, and learning how to make a space for all that, I've learned how to make a space for all of you. And I live a much more peaceful and less contentious life with those around me as a result of practicing love in myself. It seems to be the solve against judgment of you, because there's only one. When I rob from you, I steal from myself. When I yell at you, I put myself down. We're all connected. That's a spiritual truth that religions have been attempting to teach us for thousands of years. And I'll end with this. I know I'm running a little late. I'm sorry. Real quick story. It talks about a certain simple attitude that we have to take into our daily lives, a certain thing kind of that we have to bring, And there's this story of this old monk, and he's walking. There's a Ronin samurai coming from the other side of this smoky, gallery, and the Ronin's been drinking, and he hasn't had a master in a long time, and he pokes the monk in the shoulder and says, "Monk, I want you to teach me about heaven and hell." And the monk looks up at him and says, You with your greasy hair and your rusted sword, you stink. You want me to teach you about heaven and hell? And as he's saying this, and no one talks to a samurai that way, the Ronin unsheathes his sword and he's getting ready to kill him. And right before, the monk says, "That's hell." And the samurai is so moved that this monk risked his life to teach him this deep spiritual lesson that he drops to his knees and he bows in the street. And he touches his shoulder and says, "And that's heaven." Thanks for letting me be of service, guys.